Okay, as we work to understand challenging behaviors, there's a real need for and benefit for some type of an interview process. One that values different people's perspectives and includes different constituents, parents, relatives, um, service providers that might be working with the child. These interviews are useful for gathering comprehensive information in a short period of time. If you're doing some type of consultation in the classroom, you might consider doing interviews first before you go into observations. The interview will give you the opportunity to identify the behavior, define what it looks like, identify the times of day that maybe you should consider doing some observations. All of those are going to be really useful pieces of information for you to have from this functional assessment interview process. This week in class, one of the things that you're going to do is practice completing the last section, or section I believe it is, of the functional assessment interview. And it looks something like this. I think I have a sample of the form posted for you, but for your assignment, you won't have to use the form. You'll simply format your answer in a response that looks kind of similar to this chart here. But essentially, it goes back to these behavior equations. So you're taking a look at some case studies or scenarios and thinking about what is the immediate antecedent, or what triggers the behavior, what's a description of the behavior, what are the maintaining consequences, so what happens immediately after the behavior, and then making an assessment about what you think the function might be. And again, that fits in with the idea of hypothesis development. And that is the third step of these individualized interventions, developing a hypothesis, or your best guess about what's being communicated. When functional assessments are complete, you develop a hypothesis. When you're working as a team, it's helpful maybe to use a big chart paper or whiteboard to be able to analyze the challenging behaviors in routines, activities, or interactions. And then using the basic behavior equations, again, the trigger, the behavior, and the maintaining consequence of the challenging behaviors, and chart out or write out those behavior equations on chart paper. When you have the basic behavior equation charted out, you can determine the function of the challenging behavior, or at least one of many possibilities of the function of challenging behaviors. Once you've got the trigger, the behavior, the maintaining consequence, and the function, then you have all the components you need to be able to write what we call a hypothesis statement. And this is simply your theory, your assessment of what is triggering this behavior, what is the behavior, and what's being communicated. So let's look at a hypothesis statement here. And so we have in-group play situations, outside and in-play centers. Tim uses verbal aggression, threats, physical aggressions, hitting, pushing, kicking, punching, and property destruction, like throwing or banging toys, to obtain toys and or join play. So when this occurs, the peer relinquishes the desired toy and leaves the play area, and or an adult intervenes and provides Tim with excessive negative attention. So that is combining all of the elements of the behavior equation into one hypothesis statement. This is one teacher's assessment of what's going on with Tim. So it contains the trigger, the group indoor and outdoor play. It contains the challenging behavior, the verbal aggression, physical aggression, or property destruction. It contains the maintaining consequences. So peers give up their toys, peers leave the area, or an adult intervenes with lots of negative attention on Tim. And so the purpose of the play, we think, is to obtain a toy or to engage in joining play. So it's all combined here in this one hypothesis statement. Here's another example of a different hypothesis statement that contains all of these disparate elements together too. So we have Billy will use tantrums to request a social interaction. Billy will initiate a chase game or request to be held by pulling the adult's hand or positioning the adult. If the adult does not comply, Billy will cry loudly, scream, and bring his hands to his face or ears. Often the adult will comply with his request or pick him up. So you'll see that this hypothesis statement still contains all of the elements. It has a trigger, a challenging behavior, maintaining consequences, and it gives us an interpretation of the purpose or function of Billy's behavior. If you're unsure of the hypothesis that's been developed, it's important to think about what would make the challenging behavior stop. Or you could ask, is there something that could be done to allow the child to obtain a desired item or activity, or escape an activity or use of an item? If after thinking about all these things you're still not sure, stop and do some more observations. Go back and just collect more data in that same context or environment. It's important to be aware that some challenging behaviors might have the same form but serve multiple functions. It's also important to realize that some challenging behaviors may begin around one function, like I want to escape, and they might continue to serve other functions like getting the teacher's attention or grabbing a friend's attention. So there could be multiple hypotheses developed around each equation. So finally, I just want to end this week's component wrapping up a few things that we've covered. The first is that challenging behavior has meaning for the child. They're clearly trying to communicate something to us by using challenging behaviors. Children use behavior to access something or someone, or to avoid something or someone. And we use the process of functional assessment to determine the function or purpose of challenging behavior. And one way that we do that are thinking through those behavior equations. What's the trigger? What's the behavior? And what are the maintaining consequences? And knowing these things allows us to develop hypothesis statements that contain all of these different elements. So this week in class, you're going to practice all of those. And then next week, we're going to continue on with additional strategies that are part of this PBS process.